Good afternoon, everyone. We're now going to take a wider view. We're going to look at public health, and my presentation is going to draw on the report that we did last year on eliminating health inequalities. And what we tried to do there was look at the connection between health outcomes and other factors such as income, wealth, education, and put that in the context of the fact that we have a new public health strategy that's in formation. And I know Tony's going to be talking a bit more about that. And I suppose what I'm going to set out is some of what we've put in our submission to the Department of Health in relation to what we think needs to be in the new public health strategy, drawing on some international experience. So the new public health strategy, well, the working title is Your Health is Your Wealth. And I think it's useful just to recap. It was launched last June on the terms of reference, and there was 4 key areas. The first related to the wider determinants of health and health inequalities, and that's what I'm going to focus on. There's also plans to address the issue of chronic disease and lifestyle, intersectoral and cross-sectoral approaches, and that means looking at different aspects of health, hospital care, primary care, and protection and responses to public health threats such as flu epidemics. So I'm going to just focus on the first element, on the determinants of health and the issue of health inequalities. So just to, this is available on our website to restate what we put in as an overarching aim of what we think public health policy should do. It should protect the whole population from ill health, facilitate people to live longer, healthier and more fulfilling lives, and reduce health inequalities by improving the health of the poorest fastest, because there's lots of evidence to show that if you live in a deprived area, have a low level of education, your health outcomes, or you're more likely to be sick and you're more likely to die younger, and I'm going to say more about that later on. Specifically, we looked at international evidence, and it needs to go beyond health. It needs to look at early years, from preschool, school years, supporting people to maximise their capabilities, into adulthood, employment and working conditions, and healthy communities, which can be green spaces, transport. All of those things have an impact on people's health, but also health services, and the provision of high quality, publicly funded and universally accessible public services, including health, have to have a strong focus on preventative measures. So the types of international evidence that we've looked at, I suppose the first big report that highlighted the connection between wider factors on health, such as income, education, was the WHO Commission on the Social Determinants of Health, and that was published in 2008. But actually before that, the Norwegians were ahead of the game, and they had their national strategy to reduce social inequalities in health. That was 2006-2007, which really identified the same things that the WHO Commission did also. But what's really interesting about this, and I'm going to be talking about this further, is how they used their analysis of what's happening with health to inform their new Norwegian Public Health Act, which just came into effect in January. So there's 2 things I'm going to be focusing on, is talking about the content of public health strategy, but also the process, the policy-making process, and how good processes result in good policy. We also have the Marmot Review, which many of you are probably familiar with. It was a follow-on from the WHO Commission. It's called Fair Society, Healthy Lives. And again, that was the basis of the public health strategy in England, Healthy Lives, Healthy People, and that's been informing policies since then. I also just want to point to another recent development in December 2011. The Council of the European Union, this is under the Polish presidency, they adopted a conclusion that closing health gaps within the EU through concerted action to promote, they didn't have to promote twice, healthy lifestyles and behaviour. And I suppose that sounds great, but the European Public Health Alliance were quite critical of it. They said it doesn't go far enough. And what they said, why they said that, is that they said there's the focus is there's too much of a focus on lifestyle factors, which is drinking, smoking, unhealthy behaviour. that it was dealing with the downstream factors without looking at upstream. And it was interesting, Breed talked about downstream and upstream. And I suppose when we talk about upstream, we talk about the factors that are the causing, what the underlying causes of behaviour. And that conclusion did not go far enough in that regard. We've had lots of talk today about Wilkinson-Pickett. Again, it's an important context. But interesting as well, the OECD, which we've looked at, it's called Better Life Index. And this is work that they have, it started off as a commission that President Sarkozy set up on measuring progress and well-being, with Joseph Stiglitz, whom you might be familiar with, and Fitoussi and Sen. And they are looking at, we need to move beyond GDP, how we measure progress. We need to look at a whole range of factors. So they have an interesting website. It's worth taking a look. But I suppose it's part of a kind of a move towards we need to take a more holistic look at our health, but also our society. I'm just going to recap on social determinants of health, which we talked about in detail in our own report on eliminating health inequalities, but I think it's important to highlight what they are. It's income, wealth, housing, environment, education. So where you're born, where you grow up in, where you're educated, where you work, if you work, and how you grow old, they all impact on your health. And as Catherine was saying, what's important is not necessarily the level of wealth or income, it's actually how it's distributed in the society. And I think it's also important to mention health services, that while it's only one of a number of factors. And the fact that we've had this two-tier system for far too long, it exacerbates the health inequalities in terms of people's access to the care they need in a timely manner, and the fact that people can purchase care and skip the queues and all of that. So, but we have made progress on health in general. I think it's important to say that as well. You know, our life expectancy is good, mortality, the child mortality is very good. But when you look behind the headline figures, what we haven't been good at is looking at health inequalities, and it has been painfully absent from legislation and also various policy documents. So I think we have an opportunity now with this, with the fact that we will have a new public health strategy to put health inequalities at the core of that strategy. I just want to just highlight a couple of things in relation to how health inequalities manifest themselves. This is a chart. It's from the work that's done by the CSO, and the black are men and the red are women. So just look at men, and over here we have professional managerial classes down to unskilled socioeconomic classes, and this is age on the vertical axis. So you can see that people who are professionals, managerial, have a higher life expectancy than those who will be in the manual labour, builders, plumbers. And there's a gap of 6 years for men. For women, there's less of a gap, but there's still a gap. I think it's about 4 years in terms of if you're in the professional managerial classes, you will live about 4 years longer than women who are in semi-skilled, unskilled socioeconomic class. So that's the manifestation of health inequalities. People die younger, and they also tend to be less, have more illnesses. And the Institute of Public Health have done some really good work in looking at different types of diseases and how that impacts on different socioeconomic groups. This is another just example of health inequalities, and it's the Survey of Income and Living Conditions. It's done every year. It's a pan-European survey, and along the bottom here we've got Sweden, Austria, France, Ireland and Portugal, and the numbers here are actually their Gini coefficient scores, and Catherine explained that very well. So Sweden, the closer to 0, the more equal you are. The higher, the closer to 100, the more unequal you are. And this is a question. Now it's subjective, but I think it's interesting that people's perceptions of their needs and how their needs are being met, and basically the question related to what people think, their attitudes to whether they can afford necessary treatments. Now, it wasn't defined, but it was just to ascertain attitudes. And it's very interesting when you look at, in Sweden and Austria, it's 0.5%. They think, well, yeah, we feel we can access necessary treatments whenever we need to. But the more unequal you are, it shoots right up. So again, it's just a trend. It's subjective, but I think it paints a picture of what's going on. Now, public health policy can't solve all of these problems, but it's a really important part of the policy mix. And I think it's useful to look at where we are now in relation to the fact that there's a new public health strategy forthcoming. And at the moment, we're just about here. Probably, just in terms of looking at the strategic societal planning overall, what are the goals and strategies in relation to public health? But I have to say, I think we actually missed a step. We didn't do the overview of public health and health determinants, and in our report we called for a similar type Marmot review, what they did in Norway, to be undertaken in Ireland. Now, you probably would come up with a similar set of issues, but the context is different in every country. So I think it would have been really useful to have a similar type report undertaken in Ireland that would then inform the public health strategy. And then from that, you move on to, well, what are the policies and actions that we need to take to make these strategies a reality? And then you look at implementation, moving to evaluation, and you're back at square one again. So I think it's really important in terms of the processes. There was a lot of discussion about limited resources, but you can do a lot without changing, you can do a lot without increasing the cost of what you do. You can think about what you're doing differently. And I think that's what I tried to capture in that diagram. So I'm going to talk about Norway for a couple of minutes, and we're always talking about the Nordic countries. And we talk about them all the time because they just do things really well, especially in relation to equality, and also the way they make policy and the processes. They're very strong. I think we can certainly learn a lot from them in that regard. So, as I said earlier, their new Public Health Act came into effect on the 1st of January. But the report they wrote in relation to health inequalities, they published that in 2006-2007. So they've had a long lead-in time to look at a whole range of policy areas, and it's culminated in the Act in January. And their big overall arching aim is to contribute to societal development that promotes public health and reduces social inequalities in health. Now, when I read it first, it can read like motherhood and apple pie. That's great. But when you get behind it, and I'm going to talk about this in more detail, there's some really serious policies that they have actually been implementing over the last number of years to make this happen. But also, I think another point that's important to highlight is what's very strong in the Act is strengthening public health work in the development of policies and planning. I think Nat mentioned it, and the Norwegians talk about this a lot, the levelling up the gradient. So you focus on those whose outcomes are not as good as others, and that's who you focus on in terms of bringing everybody up through policy measures. And I'll be talking about some of the specifics of that. Health in all policies. And this is where public health is not just about healthcare, it's about income, it's about transport, environment, all of those factors which I mentioned. It's also sustainable development is also one of the principles that they apply, and that's about looking at the longer term perspective, and they talk about climate change and environmental factors. Something, I suppose, a term that we're not familiar with they call this the precautionary principle, and really what that is, it's the importance of evidence-based policy making, so that you try things out, you pilot an initiative, and you make adjustments, or if it's not working, you try something else. But I think what the important is there is evidence-based. And then finally, participation. And that it has to be about transparent, inclusive processes with the participation of multiple stakeholders. And civil society is highlighted, not just in terms of the consultation in relation to public health, and I think Department of Health has been quite good in that regard, in terms of there has been a very active consultation process put in place in relation to a new public health strategy, but it certainly shouldn't end with the strategy. It has to follow through into how policy gets implemented. And the community voluntary sector has like all of the sectors, has experienced terrible cuts. But we still have a very active and engaged civil society sector, and they're really important stakeholders in in implementing good public health policy. Okay, I'm just going to talk about briefly some of the specificities that the Norwegians have looked at. And they talk about income, and they talk about reducing economic inequalities, eliminating poverty, and ensuring fundamental economic security for everyone. So really, we're talking about, they use the taxation system to equalise income. They have really strong social security supports in terms of people have a minimum standard of income that they don't fall below. And it's interesting, there's been a lot of work looking at how the Nordic countries have responded to the crisis, and they haven't suffered the same extent of collapse as other countries such as ourselves, and that's mainly because of the strong social safety net. And there's good economic arguments to that as well, because people maintain a certain level of spending in their economies, which maintains the domestic economy, which is really important. Okay, moving on to childhood and care and education, and they've done a lot of work in Norway in terms of preschool, language supports, building competencies, and targeted measures. So there's really strong emphasis on early childhood care and education. Employment and working environment. This is about the availability of jobs. People have good working conditions, a more inclusive working life, and work-life balance. And I think, you know, a couple of people have mentioned it, International Women's Day, and we have a long way to go in this country in terms of facilitating women, in particular, in balancing work and family responsibilities. And we need to look at having paid parental leave for men and women, because I think until we have a situation where policies support men and women to take up equal responsibilities for caring, it's going to always be difficult for women to participate fully in the labour force. Health behaviour, that's the lifestyle factors, the diet, the alcohol, the tobacco. It's important, but it's only one of the mix. And then health services and social inclusion. And it's interesting what they're doing in Norway at the moment. They're phasing out all of their the user fees for particular services, because they found it to be highly regressive. The costs are prohibitive for lower income groups. So they're just making sure that all the services are provided free at the point of delivery, and also looking at better and tailored services for specific groups such as those with intellectual disabilities and migrant communities. So I suppose what TASC is interested in looking at is, you know, a lot of information, a lot of evidence that shows that more equal societies do better. And one of the things that we have been looking at is that we need to change our economic model. And there's a couple of things we need to look at there. We need growth, because we want to have these public services. We want to have what the Nordic countries have, but we have to pay for it. But we need a strong economy, and a couple of things need to change with our current model. One of the reasons why our crash was so bad was that we had moved from being productive to being an economy largely based on speculative activity. Right up until the early 2000s, we were really innovative. We were making new things. We were doing things better. We were very competitive in lots of ways. But in the late 2000s, that changed to speculating on markets, speculating on houses, buying and selling houses to each other. We all know the story. So we need to revisit that. In terms of having a good, strong, productive base that makes the most of our competitive advantages, such as in terms of the potential for renewables, renewable energy, and the agri-food sector. And there's lots of things that we need to look at in that regard. But also, I think critically, is that looking at an economic model that is job intensive. Because while FDI is really important, it is not job intensive. So we need to look at creating other industries and supporting other industries that create jobs. And I think all you need to do is look at the pictures in the paper and the reports of those job fairs over the last couple of days, and it really is depressing to see those queues of people looking for jobs in other countries. And I suppose the point I'm trying to make here is that the connection between the economy and wider society, and the need for the economy to serve society and to promote health and well-being. And another aspect of that is looking at fiscal policy. And income equality is essential for redistributing better health. And that's in terms of the amount of tax we pay and the provision of services. So we need to equality-proof the budget, for example, and I think it's out there on the table. We got support from the Equality Authority to do an audit of the budget 2011, and what we found was that those on low incomes lost proportionately more of their income than those who are on higher income. So I think that needs to be looked at. So we've called for the need for budgetary measures to be equality-proofed. And all that means is you look at different income groups, you look at different taxation measures, and you assess how much income will be lost by this tax, if we introduce this tax measure on different income groups. That's it in a nutshell. It's not rocket science, it's common practice in lots of other countries, and that's what we need to be doing. We also need to move gradually towards Western European levels of taxation to provide the kind of services that we want. And unfortunately, we're dealing with the results of previous governments that cut taxes during booms, which is not what you should be doing. It's the opposite. You should be increasing taxes during booms, so you can cut them in hard times, to make it easier to lessen the effects of recession. So, but there's also, we are still a low tax economy even now. After all the tax increases, I know it might be hard to believe, but when you look at our tax level compared to other countries, it is still quite low. So, it means that we won't have redistribution. Probably means that most of us in this room will have to pay more tax, but hopefully we will get more services, better services in return. But I think, there's a marketing job to be done in this country in relation to getting how we use taxes. Okay, and then I suppose in our Eliminating Health Inequality report, we talked about two areas we highlighted were the need to increase investment in education and public health services. And what we all hear is that, but we've no money, we're in an EU IMF bailout fund. But I think we need to look beyond the current crisis to think, well, we don't want to repeat the mistakes of the past. What do we need to put in place now to make our society better, and that we have better health outcomes? So this is a chart. It's called the Heckman curve, and it's an American economist, and basically what he did was he looked at education and where do we get the biggest return in education. So this yellow part here is from 0 to 3, and the return, so that's the highest rate of return. That's 16. So on the basis of the modelling that he did, for every dollar that they spent on early childhood interventions, they reckon they got a return of $16. And then it actually goes down, as that's actually preschool. Then we're talking about schooling here, the orange, and that's post-school, people in employment. So the biggest bang for your buck is here at the very early years. And it's really important for a number of reasons. Well, actually, before I get into that, I just want to talk about the Irish comparison. There isn't really a comparative for Ireland, but there was a piece of work done by the Geary Institute and UCD in 2005, and they estimated that for every euro we spent, we got 6 back in terms of the return of investment in human capital. And to give you, I suppose, a comparison, when you build roads, they estimate that the return is, if you spend €1 on a road, you get 3 back. So you're getting much more in terms of investment in human capital. But there's equality arguments and there's economic arguments for investing in the very early years. In the UK, the New Economics Foundation did a piece of work on looking at how much inequality is costing in terms of obesity, family breakdown, people who didn't get the best start in life. And they estimated that over a 20-year period that it was costing them £4 trillion over 20 years. So that's imprisonment, antisocial behaviour, the cost of the healthcare system dealing with obesity. And they also estimated that if they put in a high-quality early childhood care system and interventions focused in those early years, that it would actually cost them £620 million over the same period. So 4 trillion in terms of costs of dealing with the issues downstream versus 620 billion for actually putting preventative measures in place through the early childhood interventions. So that's just give you an example of why it's so important to, that's the economic argument. But there's also the equality arguments in terms of giving, if you invest in children at that age, they're more likely to maximise their capabilities in terms of, the contribution to the economy, contribution to their communities. So there's lots of equality arguments there as well. So this is my final slide. I just want to say a few words about public health and the spending on health. It shouldn't be viewed, it's called, we use the word cost, and I think we've talked about the word language a lot, or talked about language in general, but the cost of healthcare. But health is it's crucial for economic growth and recovery. So it's not a cost, it's an investment, it's something we can't do without. So I think just in terms of, a change of mindset is really important. Again, I think primary care, and it's been said a couple of times, it's been the poor relation. We haven't had proper functioning primary care system in this country. So it's great that we do have a minister and that there are clear measures afoot to address that. And if we get it right, we'll make it will solve so many problems in terms of the preventative measures. It's less costly, the accessibility. There's lots of good things about it. Then just a final point in relation to financing healthcare. I think we need to start with the outcomes. What do we want to achieve through healthcare? And then I think what's critical is that the programme for government delivers on its promise to finance healthcare on the basis of solidarity. So that's critical. So in our Eliminating Health Inequality report, we talked about the need to evaluate the single provider model with multiple providers, because we're a small country. There's lots of things. It's not clear what's the best model. And I suppose I did take some comfort from the minister does seem to be looking at different types of models, and I think that's really important. But what's critical is that it's financed on the basis of solidarity. Thanks for listening.